Hello and welcome back everyone to PKIdeas for another tournament reflections video. This time around, City of Adelaide Chess Championship 2017 round number 5. This time I am black, coming after a win against Aaron Lee, and now I'm versing Colin Cloudsdale. Now, Colin Cloudsdale is quite a seasoned veteran, winning the Seniors Championship in the previous year. He's quite a good player, a strong player, and he plays quite solidly as well. I was expecting a very bland game with minimal amount of tactics, but more strategy. So the game started off with move number 1, e4. Followed by e6, d4, d5. I'm sure you've seen this opening before in my other games as well. This is the French defense. This time around he plays knight to d2. Normally knight to c3 is the normal move that is played, the Tarrasch, or playing e5 would give you the advanced variation, and pawn takes pawn would give you the exchange variation. So this time around he decided to play knight to d2. Knight to d2 is also a common main line, but I'm not well versed in the theory of the whole thing, but I know what to do against it, so it wasn't a problem. Knight to f6, e5, knight to d7, f4, c5, knight to d3, knight to c6. So here, basically, White's plan is to develop his pieces. His plan to bring the knight out here, after he brings the bishop out, and then just castle kingside. The plan for black is as normal: queen to b6, develop bishop, and then castle, and then afterwards play f6. Now, before this game, I didn't know that you had to play f6, but as I was going through the game in analysis after I finished the game, Colin had told me that f6 was the move to play, so thank him for that. c3. Queen to b6, knight to e2, bishop to e7, g3, castles. So in this position, if we look at major differences between the two positions, look at how many pieces I've developed. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got a pawn in the center and I've castled. In terms of White's position, he's only developed 2 pieces, moved many pawns, and his king is in the center. So in this position, you could say that positionally I would have the advantage, but the computer says otherwise, saying that bishop to h3 would give White a slight advantage of 0.16, which could be minimal, but I still consider it as a slight advantage for White. Bishop to h3, c takes d4, knight e takes d4, and knight to c5. Castles, and knight to e4. So in this position we see that my pawn on d5 is extremely strong. The d4 square is strong for White, and the e4 square is strong for black. Now in this position, the whole reason why White goes about playing the knight to d2 to f3 maneuver is so that he could get this knight on g1 onto d4, so that it is guarded by this knight on f3. So quite a typical French position. I didn't mind that much, but something to concentrate on is this b6 to g1 diagonal. So he decided to play queen to e2. I play bishop to d7, bishop to e3, bishop to c5, and then king h1. He finally got the king off that diagonal. Now what happens is I play rook a to c8, bringing my rooks into the game, and Colin decides to swap pieces off because currently his bishop on e3 isn't necessarily the best piece on the board. So the sooner that he swaps that off with my good bishop on c5, the better his position will become. So knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, bishop takes c5, queen takes c5. Notice how in that position I tried to leave this file open for my rook. The pawn on c3 is kind of stopping my rook from getting to c2. So this is a semi-open file. Now knight to d4 was played, replacing the knight that used to be on d4 and causing trouble for me in terms of attacking the e6 pawn. So I had to play queen to e7, guarding my pawn. Now f5 is going to be a threat real time soon. But the only reason why he doesn't want to play is because my bishop on c6 still has the diagonal which his king is on, so he doesn't necessarily want to open up straight away. So he plays bishop to g2, knight to c5, queen to e3, bishop to d7, and rook a to e1. After which I had to replace my knight. The knight on c5 isn't necessarily doing much. The plan is to go to e4, but the only thing is the bishop on g2 has got that square completely covered. So I had to try and find another square. What's another square that this pawn on d5 is guarding? And that would be the c4 square, sorry. So my plan was to get the knight to c4. And how do you do that? By playing knight to a4, knight to b6, and then knight to c4. And that was my plan during the game. I played knight to a4, he played rook f2, played knight to b6, and he played f5. Now I can't necessarily keep playing that plan of playing knight to c4 because now his queen has an escape square on f4. So the position is going to get harder for me. So I had to abandon that plan and then play against my opponent, and I play e takes f5. Knight takes f5, bishop takes f5, rook takes f5. Now we got an isolated pawn on d5, which couldn't necessarily advance because of this pawn on c3. And also, white's got this dead battery on this pawn on e5. There are 1, 2, 3 pieces guarding that pawn on e5 when there's only one of mine attacking. So he could use his other 2 rooks or his queen and this rook on f5 for something different. Maybe he could develop an attack on my g7 pawn or my h7 pawn, both of which are feasible. So rook to c6, rook to f4, rook to e6, now bringing more attackers into the game. Queen to d4, and then I played queen to d8. Now here queen to d8 is a blunder. Instead of queen to d8, f6 was supposed to be played. After f6, engine suggests that bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and then rook to d8. There is, however, one unfortunate thing in this position, that my rook is going to be pinned for the whole time. So I have to play something like king h8 after he plays queen to c4, like so. And the position is quite double-edged. He has a pawn up in this position, but his pawn on e5 is going to go quite soon. So instead of f6, I played queen to d8, which is a blunder, and here he could have capitalized straight away by playing a4, a5, and my pieces were not ready at all to create an attack or to defend everything that is being attacked. He decided to play solidly instead of going for tactical game and played b3. Which supports a4. So rook f8, a4, and now I played f6. Now I've got everything supported now. If my knight moves away, then I can easily take on the pawn and then fork the rook and the queen. So you can see here that even one move difference in making an important move can make the difference in getting the advantage during the game. So bishop to h3, rook takes e5, rook d1, I've won a pawn, queen to e7, bishop to g2, queen a3, and rook 1 to f1. Here I don't think he necessarily knew what his exact plan was, and I could have taken advantage of it by playing something like rook to e2. But in this position, king to h8 was what I played. I decided to play solid as well. One thing about chess is that you can never go wrong playing solidly. If you play solid, the minimum that you got is a draw and not a loss. If you play a tactical game, there is a chance of a loss happening. So he played a5, queen takes a5, rook a1, queen b5, rook takes a7, all of which were natural moves. But now I can play knight to c8, and I did. And he played rook to a3, and I played knight to e7. Now instead of knight to e7, knight to d6 is probably a better move. And the reason is that I can go to d4 in the next move. But I wanted to guard this pawn on d5, so I played knight to e7, queen a4, and here I did queen takes a4 straight away. Queen takes a4 straight away isn't the best move in the position. It is queen to c6. Queen to c6 is an important move because it removes my isolated pawn on b7. So let's say he does queen takes c6, I can do b takes c6, and my isolated pawns are no more. They are connected and guarding each other. Now instead of queen to c6, I played queen takes a4, rook takes a4, knight c6, rook a to a1, king g8, rook f d1, and now I need extra pieces guarding this pawn. So basically I can't necessarily move away my knight because it lets the rook calm down and attack my b7 pawn. So I have to bring in one other piece which I haven't been using during the whole game, and that is a king on g8. So rook to d8, rook d3, king f7, rook a d1, king e6. Now here he played c4, which is not the best move in the game. The reason why it's not a good move is because it allows me to swap off pawns, and that inherently gives me an advantage. So here I just took the pawn, and he played bishop to h3 check. Now notice if rook takes d8, rook takes knight takes d8, and if rook takes d8 again, then I have rook e1 check. That forces the bishop to go back, takes, and I pretty much got 2 extra pawns to play with. So in this position, as the engine says, that it's clearly winning for me, and so that's why he probably didn't play rook takes d8 straight away, but instead he played bishop to h3 check. This forced my king to go back, king to h3. Notice how playing the bishop to h3 meant that he had won a move, won a tempo, because initially he had to move the bishop out of the way to stop the king from getting trapped on h1. So he did it by checking me. So always remember that every time you can do something by force that you were going to do anyway, it's always better to do it by force because it gives you more time to play another move. So after king to e7, b takes e4, rook takes c3, rook takes e3, rook to e1 check, king g2, knight e5, rook b3, rook e2, and king f1, rook takes h2. In terms of pawns, I am 2 pawns up, but that's slowly going to change right now because he has rook takes b7 check. Now I played rook to d6, and he played bishop to g2, defending his bishop. Now in this position, I should have played g6, guarding my pawn and giving me an advantage. However, what I played was knight takes c4. Knight takes e4 is an okay move, planning this, but it always loses 1 pawn. So instead of taking on g7, he had to play king to g1 because of the knight to e3 threat. After king to g1, I played rook h6, rook takes g7, rook g6, rook takes h7, rook takes g3. And so the game went on for another 47 moves. But I'm not going to bore you with the nuances of how I didn't manage to queen my pawn. Ultimately, Colin is a really good endgame player, and he is able to not fall for easy tricks and traps and whatnot. So as I said before, I was expecting a solid game. I got a solid game, and the game ended in a draw. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. The game itself was really long, and it probably finished at around 11:30 at night when we started at 7 o'clock. So a good 4.5 hours was the time frame of this game. So I was both tired, hungry. Colin was probably tired and hungry as well. So in the end, the game was a draw. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please comment down below any analysis that I had missed. If you like the video, like it. It's really good to know what you're thinking. So comment down below what you want and what you're thinking as well. With that being said, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications button. If you do that, you get notifications every single time that I upload a video, which is going to be useful if you're following this series. So with that being said, thank you, and I'll see you next time for the next round of the City of Adelaide Open 2017.